So, I know what you're thinking, how could such a cute little yellow sponge cause so much drama? Well, SpongeBob SquarePants has actually soaked up a whole lot of hot water over the last 20 years. He's been banned in several countries, creepy scenes have been totally erased from history, and many have accused him of being a bad influence on kids.
Gary!
But there's so much more, and it only gets worse. So grab your wetsuit and let's dive into every single SpongeBob controversy since 1999. So first of all, let's unpack the most recent and perhaps the most messed up thing I've ever seen, which is SpongeBob Rule 34 art by the actual artist from the show. YouTuber L Supersonic Q recently released an almost 20-minute video breaking all of this down, so perhaps he's the best person to explain, well, whatever the hell this is.
One of the biggest SpongeBob controversies to ever exist was one that the general public didn't even know about for nearly 20 years. It dates back to the time when SpongeBob's earlier seasons were in production, around the early 2000s, and was made by real storyboard artists on the show within the walls of Nickelodeon at the time. As Kent Osborne recollects in an interview with animation magazine Hogan's Alley, at the end of every season, the artists would create crude and hilarious drawings of SpongeBob to make each other laugh, and eventually, these were compiled into a book that every crew member received a copy of. As he stated, the book was called Behind Closed Doors, but none of its content had been seen, and almost nobody had even heard about the topic in the lost media or SpongeBob community. This was until July 2023, when someone who had formerly been in Nick's animation building reached out to me with a copy of the book, stating it had been given to them rather than being tossed out during a cleaning of the studio. While scans of the entire book were not provided, we did get to see a select few pages, including the cover. The book was not just crude and hilarious drawings, but rather inappropriate, vile, and off-model. For the first time since the book's creation, we could see several pages of content, which are very explicit and feature many adult situations, jokes, and humor. While the general consensus of the drawings was negative, for the fact that SpongeBob's released content exists in such a different way, it definitely drew the attention of the internet to discuss the meaning behind them. One conclusion leads to the fact that this was simply the artists blowing off steam from a non-stop work grind on the show. But on the other hand, some of its content could act as social commentary for what the work culture of Nickelodeon was rumored to be like at the time. However, a couple of the artists who have copies even caught wind of its release and commented about it, stating that this kind of thing is common in the industry. Whether the book is harmless fun or something more malicious, you can decide, and discover more of its secrets in my complete video covering the topic.
The Panty Raid. Even though Season 2 Sailor Mouth horrified some parents for its implied bad language,
Hey Patrick, how the are ya?
Pretty good, SpongeBob.
it still wasn't actually pulled from the air. In fact, the only episode from the early era to be banned from reruns on Nickelodeon is Season 3's Midlife Crustacean. In the episode, Mr. Krabs is afraid of getting old, so he hangs out with SpongeBob and Patrick to try and feel young again, but instead, they make him feel a bit too young. He didn't want to feel like a baby, he wanted to feel like a rebellious young adult. Think James Dean, but just a bit redder. So just when he's about to give up, Patrick tells him that he's gonna miss the Panty Raid, an activity that immediately sparks Krabs' interest. So the perverts sneak into a woman's house and nick some knickers, and Krabs does love this rush. That is until he realizes that his prized panties were actually his very own mother's.
You're grounded for the rest of the night.
Yes, Mommy.
So, catching her son Red Clawed, she grounds him as if he's a naughty little boy all over again. So while obviously a children's show doing a panty raid wouldn't slide today, the payoff of the joke is equal parts messed up and also pretty hilarious. But the suits at Nickelodeon weren't laughing, so in 2018 the studio had to take it out of rerun rotations, and in 2021 the episode was full on removed from the streaming platform on Paramount+. Now, there was a glitch where the episode briefly appeared on Paramount+, only to be removed shortly after. Oopsie daisy. Quarantined krabs. Speaking of banned episodes, there's just one more not on Paramount Plus, and that is Season 12's Quarantined Crab. In it, the characters are forced to quarantine inside the Krusty Krab when it's discovered that someone has clam flu.
You're all under quarantine!
This episode was supposed to air in 2020, but because of the pandemic, it caused the premise to feel all too real, so therefore, it didn't get to air until April 2022. Considering how long it takes to create an episode of the series, the showrunners definitely couldn't have predicted a global-sized pandemic taking over the world. So Nickelodeon wisely waited until the pandemic had died down to air it, although it wasn't still included on the 12-season DVD release, nor was it added to Paramount Plus. But I do believe it might now be available on Paramount Plus, though I can't really be sure because I live in the UK and I don't have access to it. But I'm sure that one of you guys will let me know in the comments below if it is available. In all honesty, this entire video could be filled with banned and censored SpongeBob episodes, but because we have so much to talk about already, let's just group some of them up. So, there are two Season 2 episodes called Shanghai and Gary Takes a Bath, which were banned for years in the UK for the former being too scary. And Gary Takes a Bath was banned because of this joke.
Don't drop 'em.
Another reason because of its banning was because of this image, known as the subliminal girl who flashed on screen only briefly.
Sorry you had to see that.
This is because it was deemed far too disturbing by censors. Although later on the bans were lifted, then enforced again, and then lifted again to air on TV in 2011. So I guess we had some resolution. But this isn't a rare case because tons of episodes have also been censored from international markets. And I mean tons, just look at this never-ending list right here. For example, the UK version of Pizza Delivery cut this line.
Oh, my aching tentacles.
Why is the UK so darn sensitive? So let's transition from banned episodes to hated episodes. And one of the most loathed episodes of all time is Season 7's One Course Meal. So why? Well, my buddy Phantom Strider listed this as his least favourite episode ever, so of course I had to ask him why. Sorry, Josh.
Hey, thanks for inviting me back, Lydia. Not that I ever wanted to talk about this abysmal episode ever again. Ugh. So One Course Meal is infamously low rated on IMDb with a dismal 3.5 out of 10. Critics and audiences just unanimously agree it's a dreadful episode, and many consider it to be the worst SpongeBob episode ever. But why? Well, the plot of the episode is that when Krabs finds out Plankton hates whales, he dresses up like one to scare him.
I want plankton meat!
But the bullying gets so bad that it leads to Plankton trying to off himself. It was just seen as violent, cruel, and disturbing. And unsurprisingly, many parents took issue with the episode. And now, once again, I'll aim to never talk about this episode again. Back to you, Lydia.
The deleted scene in just one bite. So unlike One Course Meal, everybody can universally agree that they like just one bite. This episode focused on Squidward finally taking a bite of a Krabby Patty. He did this just to shut SpongeBob up, and he tells him he hates it. But in fact, Squidward had too much pride to tell SpongeBob that he was right, and they do taste good.
Oh, so delicious!
So he decides to sneak inside the Krusty Krab in the middle of the night and eat some while no one is around. However, those who got to see the original airing saw that Squidward's efforts of getting into the Krusty Krab were far more difficult than the edited version. Rather than the door being locked, Squidward enters by knocking over a bucket of gasoline, and when a robot carrying a lit match approaches it, he drops it and it sets Squidward on fire. Now, even though the scene is pretty tame in the world of cartoon slapstick, Nickelodeon still removed it. This is because Just One Bite premiered less than a month after September 11th, and less than a decade earlier, a child passed away in a fire caused by her brother who was allegedly inspired by a scene in a Beavis and Butthead episode that involved matches. And in 2018, SpongeBob showrunner Vincent Waller confirmed on Twitter that Nickelodeon standards and practices does not care for gags involving petrol and matches. However, in other countries like Canada and Korea, they still air this original version. SpongeBob Sexuality. SpongeBob's sexuality has never really been discussed or disclosed in the series, and despite what previous Rule 34 images show, SpongeBob is at a stage in his life where he's not looking for a partner. He's fine with working at the Krusty Krab, catching jellyfish, and hanging out with his friends. But that's not to say that maybe one day he'll find someone to settle down with.
Will I ever get married?
Maybe someday.
And although SpongeBob isn't seeking romantic relationships, his tight bonds with characters like Patrick and Squidward have caused some adults to believe that SpongeBob was gay, and in their eyes see him as an advocate for gay culture. In the documentary Square Roots, the story of SpongeBob SquarePants, Dr. Steve Sprill explained,
After it had been on for a couple of years, there were a few episodes that somehow acted as a Rorschach card for some people, where they would watch the show and they would say, wait a minute, these characters are gay.
And when SpongeBob and Friends were featured in a 2005 pro-tolerance music video to the song We Are Family, conservative groups accused the series of promoting gay culture to children. As evidence of this, they pointed to episodes like Valentine's Day or Rockabye by Valve. But I always interpreted these episodes as being about Spongy and Patrick loving each other, platonically, as friends. And thankfully, this controversy fizzled out because everyone else knew that SpongeBob was just a funny cartoon, where the main character just had a lot of love for his friends.
Happy Valentine's Day, Bikini Bottom!
Series creator Stephen Hillenburg debunked this claim. In his interview with the Wall Street Journal, he said the character of SpongeBob is an oddball. He's kind of weird, but he's also kind of special. I always think of them as being somewhat asexual. This also makes it scientifically accurate, because in real life, sponges are actually capable of reproducing asexually. This topic was out of the news for the next 15 years, up until 2020 when Nickelodeon celebrated Pride Month by posting a picture of SpongeBob as part of the LGBTQ+ community and/or an ally. And while Nickelodeon didn't go into further detail about confirming his sexual orientation, it still sparked a lot of discussion as to what he could be. But perhaps maybe it was just their way of honouring Hillenburg's vision of him being possibly asexual. At the end of the day though, is knowing SpongeBob's sexuality really gonna change how we watch the show? Of course not. The green agenda. Conservatives really get their panties in a bunch over SpongeBob, because in addition to being scared that the show will somehow turn their kids gay, SpongeBob has also been accused of pushing a green agenda. In 2009, the book SpongeBob Goes Green was published, and this book explores the role of human emissions and the harmful effect it has on the environment. And of course, the hosts of Fox News, Fox and Friends took issue with this.
Because SpongeBob is talking a lot about global warming, and he's only looking at it from one point of view.
They argued that it pushed unproven science and rallied against the global warming agenda of SpongeBob SquarePants.
Just throwing another tire on the fire for global warming, Mr. Krabs.
But thankfully, the show has made countless children think a bit more about our effects on the oceans. The creator Stephen Hillenburg was an educator and a marine biologist, and his passion for the ocean and the creatures inspired SpongeBob SquarePants. And he had always hoped that the show could contribute to eco-awareness. In an interview, he even said, hopefully if you watch SpongeBob, you'll want to take care of our oceans. And speaking quite candidly here, is spreading eco-awareness that bad? There are tons of pieces of media out there which are just so brainless. So if there's a TV show which has a bit of knowledge, a bit of awareness, and a bit of fun, is that really the worst thing in history? I grew up in films like Once Upon a Forest and Fern Gully, which had tons of eco-awareness and it didn't do me any harm. And isn't it nice to care about the wildlife and the animals and the environment? Or am I just mad? SpongeBob's Creepypasta. Looking up creepypastas will lead you down a long rabbit hole of disturbing internet horror stories. These are definitely legends that are gonna keep you up at night. I mean, I did a whole video about Dead Bar over on my Simpsons Theory channel, and I'm still recovering. But in terms of SpongeBob, one of the most well-known is Red Mist. Now, Squidward may frequently be depressed and miserable in the series, but deep down we all know that he enjoys the chaos that SpongeBob and Patrick pull into his life. We can see this since every time he's tried to get away from them, he desires to return back home by the end. But in this infamous Red Mist creepypasta, Squidward is compelled to end it all with the lasting image being him staring at the audience with red misty eyes. This, of course, is just a made-up story, but some actually believed it was a lost episode for the longest time, and in 2019, this famous image made it into a real SpongeBob episode. In Season 12, SpongeBob in Random Land, we see Sponge and Squiddy make a delivery to a place called Random Land. And say what you want about the modern era of SpongeBob, but personally, I do love this episode. It's just so fun, and in one scene, a wall of doors appear and Squidward opens each one of them to see a weird variation of himself, with one showing Red Mist Squidward. I mean, really, it was only the older fans that would have even realized where this was from. I mean, the executives definitely didn't know. But after a certain time, the standards and practice department of Nickelodeon soon figured out what it was referencing and then demanded that the image was removed. This is simply because they didn't want kids to look up the original creepypasta. So instead, later airings of this episode replaced it with Baby Squidward, which is admittedly pretty creepy in itself. This was expanded on Twitter by supervising animator Adam Palian, and in all honesty, he was completely shocked that it ever got approved. And he followed this with another tweet that said, "It's actually kind of fun that it got censored. Haha. I Was a Teenage Gary deleted scene." Season 1's I Was a Teenage Gary is an episode that has stayed with me since I watched it as a kid. The body horror scene of SpongeBob transforming into a snail did scare the hell out of me. And to be honest, it still freaks me out. But there's a rumor going round that in the original airing of the episode, it actually shows Squidward transforming into a snail too. But it was decided that the scene was removed from future airings because it was deemed too disturbing for kids. But that simply isn't true. This is because on June 12, 2016, a YouTuber called 90s Give Me Goosebumps uploaded the original airing and it had no additional scenes. No Squidward, no snail, and certainly no body horror. Thank goodness. But despite this, many still believe that this is a Mandela effect and that the scene still happened, but I'm afraid to say that the scene just never happened. SpongeBob's declining quality and its spin-offs. Like the show The Simpsons and Family Guy, SpongeBob was far too big of a franchise to put to rest. And even though Hillenburg's vision was to have the show as just 3 seasons and a movie, Nickelodeon was definitely not ready to move on. So instead, Hillenburg passed the torch over to showrunner Paul Tibbitt, and while those Silver and Bronze Age seasons do have their moments, they admittedly pale in comparison to the first 3 seasons. This is most likely the reason why Hillenburg decided to return to SpongeBob in 2014 and contribute to the movie Sponge Out of Water. But sadly, as we all know, Hillenburg would pass away just a few years later due to ALS in November 2018. If there's one SpongeBob topic that's still a major controversy for longtime fans, it's definitely the spin-offs. Fans were outraged when Nickelodeon announced plans for a SpongeBob spin-off called Kamp Koral. This was just 3 years after Hillenburg's passing. They were so angry that it prompted many people to use this clip worldwide.
Am I really gonna defile this grave for money? Of course I am!
And what really hurts is that in that same year, the Patrick Starr Show spin-off came out. Many fans know that spin-offs were never a part of Hillenburg's vision. And Paul Tibbitt spoke out on Steve's behalf in interviews, saying that Steve would always say to me, "You know, one of these days they're gonna make us SpongeBob babies. That's when I'm out of here." Tibbitt also wrote on Twitter in response to Kamp Koral, "I do not mean any disrespect to my colleagues who are working on this show, but this is some greedy, lazy executiving right here." And they all know full well that Steve would have hated this. For Hillenburg, he wanted to keep his creation short and sweet, but unfortunately the double-edged sword that is success means that SpongeBob became far too successful to stop at just that. And unfortunately, Hillenburg isn't here to give his opinions on the spin-off. It might just be that in his later years he recognised that they were inevitable and so reluctantly accepted. But alas, we will never truly know for sure. The whole Super Bowl halftime show debacle. It's no question that Sweet Victory from the episode Band Geeks is hands down one of the best moments in SpongeBob's history. It's so beloved, in fact, that fans have pleaded with the NFL to include Sweet Victory in the Super Bowl show for years. And after the passing of Hillenburg in 2018, fans thought that the 2019 Super Bowl would be the perfect time to pay tribute to him. So, during the halftime show, millions of fans jumped from their couches when they saw SpongeBob appear on screen. And then, it was over in just 10 seconds. Just as it seemed like they were about to play the legendary song, it was all just set up for Travis Scott to arrive and perform one of his own songs. It was just a bait and switch, and it was frustrating. All the fans who got hyped up to see Sweet Victory performed and honor Hillenburg's legacy were justifiably pissed off. And what's even more annoying is that Maroon 5's halftime performance has since been ranked as one of the most forgettable halftime shows in history. And personally, I think a rendition of Sweet Victory would have definitely saved the show. SpongeBob and Burger King. For some reason, whenever SpongeBob and Burger King collaborate on marketing campaigns, controversy ensues. And 2009 was no different, with Burger King deciding to air a SpongeBob-themed commercial parodying Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby Got Back. Ah, that classic. But this time, the song now had square butts. And rewatching this commercial, it honestly looks like something out of a sketch show. And the fact that actual Nickelodeon and Burger King and their executives greenlit it is absolutely hilarious. I mean, look at it. It's just so silly, but kind of iconic. But obviously, parents complained about the sexual and inappropriate nature of the commercial, and Burger King tried to explain that the commercial was actually adults only. But come on, when a big fast food company promotes a show primarily for kids, you're gonna get slammed for it. I mean, was this really for adults? Look at their past promotions. They're kids' toys. But you know what? This wasn't the first time that SpongeBob and Burger King caused some trouble together, because in a real moment not dissimilar from a SpongeBob episode, around 4,700 Burger Kings put giant inflatable SpongeBob figures on top of their roofs. This was to celebrate the first movie premiering in 2004. But this marketing campaign hugely backfired when they were nabbed by thieves.
Thieves apparently made off with the inflatable structure. LPD says the only evidence they have so far are footprints on the roof.
But hey, maybe they just thought it was Free Balloon Day.
First we can run with the balloon.
Yeah, then we can go to the beach with the balloon.
Yeah!
And Burger King outlets would offer burger bucks to anyone who managed to recover an inflatable SpongeBob. And luckily, most of the balloons were recovered, and people got those burger bucks. But you never know, one day you could be driving down and suddenly, whoa. Some other controversies. SpongeBob is constantly under fire for something, whether it's a study finding out that the show is making kids dumber, or a 2005 report that found that SpongeBob has been linked to weight gain. He just can't seem to stay out of the news. The latter report by the National Academy's Institute of Medicine suggested that SpongeBob encourages unhealthy eating habits through its advertising. One final controversy that I really wanted to bring up is the episode SpongeBob You're Fired, which some found to be a negative portrayal of the unemployed. Some people said that it made fun of people who rely on social services, such as food stamps. It was a whole big thing in the major news outlets, with both the left and the right seeming to weaponize its message. And there you have it, that's every single major SpongeBob controversy in the show's history. And undoubtedly, I definitely probably missed lesser known controversies. So if there's any that I missed and you really think that we should talk about it, then do let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.